My name is I'm the incoming president for our Rotary Club, and it's my great pleasure to introduce to you our next guest speaker, Dr. Renee Prasad. Dr. Prasad is Associate Professor and Department Head in the Agricultural Technology Department at the University of the Fraser Valley, where she teaches pest management, agribusiness, and agroecology courses. She received her PhD from Washington State University and her Master of Pest Management from Simon Fraser University. Dr. Prasad works with local consultants, BC Ministry of Agriculture and Agriculture Canada experts, and various grower groups, and with almost all of her research done in the growers' fields. Now, I'm particularly interested in her expertise in pest management. For quite a number of years, I was the go-to guy for crop chemical and agriculture with the East Chilliwack Co-op and Agro-Pacific Industries. So I've got a great interest in what she might have to tell us. So please welcome Dr. Renee Prasad.
Do I need to use this? The microphone? Am I okay? I use my hands and I walk around. So, but I won't block the screen. So thank you, Rotary, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. These are the things you say yes to in January, and by the end of March, you're like, regrets. But as I was getting ready to put this talk together, one of the things I like to do is just go onto the web and see what's, around this topic, what's timely in the news. So next slide, please. So the story that came out just a few days ago, if you haven't heard, is there's a company in North Vancouver that won some sort of prize for a lot of money. And their project is all about growing food with very little space, indoors, with lights and without soil, etc. So you might have heard these terms like vertical production, etc. And certainly when you read the text of the story, the word sustainable agriculture comes up. When we also look for things about sustainability in agriculture, next slide please, we also see some of a lot of stories about the harms of farming. And that's certainly something that most people are aware of. It's in the public consciousness now. Next slide, please. But what you also see are stories about the cost of living, particularly the prices of food, particularly the prices of fruits and vegetables. And often these stories are not always linked together. And so I'm going to kind of come back to this piece near the end of my talk. What I was very excited about was this story, and it's actually not a story, it's a journal article from the scientific journal called Science, which is a peer-reviewed scientific article. And so this is a really great study, and it just came out on April 4th. And so you can see that it has over 50 authors, so it's these 10 plus folks plus 48 others. So that's a lot of authors. It's a really interesting study because they take data from around the world and they look at a whole bunch of studies and they're able to come up with some clear paths forward. So this is very exciting. And their main take-home message is that the what they call social benefits, and what they put in social benefits includes yield, right? So for agriculture, yield is important. But they also look at environmental benefits. And what their conclusion is there are practices that growers can do that will help them maintain yield, but still protect the environment. So the message is very clear that you don't have to have one or the other. You could have both as a path forward. So what does that look like? Part of what so the paper is called Rasmussen et al., so every now and then I might say Rasmussen et al. Their main goal is to focus on practice. corresponding increase in both environmental benefit and yield benefit. And this is good news, both for producers and for the environmental side. So I've practiced my talk, so I'm going to end with lots of room for questions. I'm a big clock there, so I'm going to time myself, so that's good. But I will have a few times when I ask for like hands up. Okay, so show hands. So when you look at this picture, and you think about the word sustainable agriculture, does this picture match your definition of sustainable agriculture? Hands up if you're saying yes. Oh, all the hands are down. Okay, next slide, please. When you see these terms like organic or that organic check mark, does that sort of give you some sense of maybe there's something there that's along sustainability? Maybe that aligns a little bit. Hands up if you're like, yes, maybe a little bit. Okay. Next slide, please. So then would it surprise you to know that those two pictures actually go together? Right? So in other words, our rainbow organic carrots that we can get in December in Chilliwack come from a farm that was, it's in the Coachella Valley, that looked like the first picture I showed you. So the reason why this is important is for next slide. The Rasmussen et al., if you're focusing on practice, you're moving away from good agriculture and bad agriculture. You can do that if you want, but I'm not going to do that. And one of the reasons I'm not going to do that is because we don't have data to tell us what good is, and we don't have data to tell us what bad is. But when it comes to practices, we have data to tell us which practices help protect yield and also provide environmental benefits. And so if we let data guide us, hopefully agriculture is data-based, then we can come up with really good practices. So in other words, there are things we can do, even in this situation, that will shift this production system from where it is now to better. And the more of the things, the practices that these growers implement, the better their production is. So scale alone, the bigness of the farm alone, does not necessarily put you in a good or bad column. And I think that it's challenging for people to hear that. But there's a lot of reasons why growers are producing at this scale. You live in Chilliwack, you are surrounded by neighbors that produce at this scale. So it's important to understand those many economic drivers for that. And I'm not going to get into that because it's sort of outside my expertise, but I'm going to focus on practice, many practices. And I'm going to focus in on three broad areas of practice that your neighbors in Chilliwack are doing now. Okay? And that you can look for when you're driving around, and you will see it happen. And could they do more? Sure. Could we all be doing more? Sure. So farmers are people, and they're just doing the best, right? And so we can become their allies. Okay. So first, let's talk about soil conservation. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about soil conservation, we're referring to practices that protect the soil. And the soil is, so my training is entomology and insects, but if I could do it all again, I'd do soils. Soils are amazing. So this is a soil profile, it's different layers of the soil. When we're talking about soil conservation, we're especially interested in the practices that impact these two top layers. And we're especially interested in that organic matter of the soil. Next slide, please. Another aspect of soil conservation is reducing soil loss. And we lose soil from water, from runoff, and we're kind of flat here, so that's not as big of a deal. But what is a big deal for us is the wind. Everyone knows that, right? So we can lose soil to the wind a lot. And that can happen year-round. So that's another soil conservation tactic. And the last one is building or maintaining this thing called soil tilth. And soil tilth is, it does have a technical definition, but what I wanted to show you with this picture is that the basic idea of soil tilth is you want soil to be loose enough so that plant roots can go down deep. Good soil tilth means if you can get down deep, those roots can go deep. So I'm going to talk at the end about how do you manage all the information that, especially when it comes to soil, you really have to be careful. You might read something about how amazing no-till agriculture is. But you have to understand that it's amazing in the prairies. It's amazing in parts of Ontario, parts. It's amazing for the Midwest of America. But for here, where it rains and our soil is wet, no-till is difficult and challenging for growers. They will not get enough heating of the soil for seeds to germinate, for example. And so we need to be mindful of that. Agriculture is dictated not just by grower practice, but by the environment in which growers are producing, the types of soil that they are producing in, and the pest complexes that are there. This means that the sustainable ag practices that are amazing in Nepal are not necessarily going to translate to the Fraser Valley. Some of them will, but some of them won't. And it's really important to understand that. Oops, I don't know, just put that for a second. So my point was that low-till is super effective in parts of North America. So if we were doing this in Calgary, I would talk about low-till as well. But we're doing this here in the Fraser Valley. So what I want to talk about is skip to one more, cover cropping. So what we can do here and what our growers do here really well is cover cropping. So cover cropping is all about keeping that soil covered from the fall all the way through the spring when we plant again. The benefits of cover cropping include that soil till. We were talking about that. So when you incorporate that cover and decomposes, that's sort of building that soil till. Better soil organic matter and more soil organic matter. So I'm going to show you some close-ups. All that cover crop decomposing supports all the living part of the soil, all the bacteria, the fungi, the insects that support soil health. And the other advantage of cover crops, which is really important for a place like the Fraser Valley where it rains a lot, is any nitrogen that's in the soil after the crop is harvested can be captured by the cover crop and then put back in the soil in the spring. So it doesn't leach through. And these are important benefits. For the grower, that's a particularly important benefit because it means they can reduce the amount of money they have to spend on nitrogen in the spring. So here's just some examples. This is a faraway shot of the field in the sumac. Here's a close-up. Next slide, please. And these are close-ups in December. So the cover crop would have been put on, probably would have been planted in September. It would be fall rye. And so in some years, like this year, we had a very mild weather all the way through till early January. The cover crop did really well. If we have a very cold fall where we have early frost, then the cover crop would not grow as well. Right? So it really does depend, but it's still there and it will grow. So, and one more picture, and when you spread the cover crop, this is what you want to see. Does anyone know what's happening here? These are earthworm casts. So when the earthworms come up and they kind of poof, you get these little casts, and this tells you that we're supporting good biological parts of the soil. We could have a whole talk about earthworms, including that most people don't realize that they're actually invasive. But in your agricultural fields, okay, just don't put them in the forest. Okay. Okay, next slide. So let's go back to our field, the carrot field, or organic carrot field. One practice that could be implemented is cover cropping. Now that's Arizona. I think they don't ever stop. But the pictures I showed you were from a carrot field in the sumac. So our carrots that are grown locally are cover cropped. They're probably not on cover crop now because they're getting planted, but that's an example of that's a practice we can implement. So far so good? Okay. Skip that. Sorry. So now I'm going to talk about another area. Before I move on, I want to say that soil conservation features heavily in that Rasmussen paper that just came out in the Journal of Science. So let's talk about crop scaling. So crop scaling is done within the context of something called integrated pest management. And integrated pest management is a way of thinking about pests, whether it's in agriculture or livestock or even for human health, that was developed in the 60s. It's inspired by both science, but also the book Silent Spring, which is written by Rachel Carson. How many people have heard of Silent Spring or Rachel Carson? Hands up. Well, that's good, because sometimes I ask it, no one puts up their hand. So, next slide, please. I really think that at a climate fair, we need to just acknowledge Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, because we would not be here, I think, if it wasn't for that book. I mean, probably we would, but Silent Spring is recognized as the start of the environmental movement by many people. Silent Spring is a book that's poorly understood by both the people who are critical of it and also the people who exalt it. If you read it, you will see that she is not saying no pesticides, but she is saying why on earth so much pesticide. And that's really the key thing there. Why is so much going on? Yes, so I just want to give Rachel Carson a shout out because I'm here because of her and probably you are too in some way. Okay, so the idea of IPM then is to use pesticides, but only when it's really necessary or warranted for the crop, when there's a risk to the crop. Again, risk is complicated. One thing that makes risk complicated for IPM is when we have an invasive species. So for example, 10 years ago, yep, I think I can safely say 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, blueberry growers were really having pretty effective IPM in their blueberry fields. They were scouting, they were looking at biological controls, a lot of interesting things were happening. Same with raspberries. But they recently had an invasive species called spotted-winged Drosophila come along that's made it very challenging to do IPM. And so that's something that they're trying to get back to, but they have to deal with that pest in the meantime. However, IPM is still widely applicable for many crops, and the goal is always, if you move away from it, to be able to get back to it. Next slide, please. So, crop scouting. So this is a picture of how I scout carrot fields. So carrots are kind of the theme here. So this is just a yellow sticky card that I can put at the edge of the field, and it catches the pest. And when I catch a certain number of pests over a certain number of days, then I hit something called a threshold, and then that triggers a recommendation to the grower. The recommendation doesn't always have to be spraying. Sometimes if the crop is big enough, the grower might decide to harvest. Okay, if it's big enough, instead of spraying, I'm going to harvest, for example. With crop scouting, we can go from a spray every 2 or 3 weeks, because we don't know, to, in most cases, the carrot fields and the sumacs that I've been scouting for the last 15 years, it's rare that I even make one recommendation in a season. Just go back. So for the grower, what scouting can do is give them some of those social benefits. They're able to get good yield, protect their crop from pests, and save money because they're not using pesticide they don't need to. And then from the environmental benefits, there's lots of data to show that we will protect pollinators because there's less spray going on. Even though carrots in the Fraser Valley grown for root crops aren't pollinated, it doesn't mean that they're not surrounded by pollinated crops. And so we need to protect pollinators in all cropping systems, not just the ones that need pollinators. And of course, we also protect beneficial insects. Yes. So things like ladybugs, and you all know hoverflies. They look like bees, but they're actually flies. They're larvae. So here's the adult hoverfly, and here's the larva. The larva feeds on aphids. So if we are not spraying for one pest, and then we're protecting beneficials that can help the other pests, those are good co-benefits. Next slide. scouting fields, learning how to scout. Okay, so back to our field of carrots in Arizona. We can do scouting, right? We can add that as another piece. It's another practice that helps improve that environmental impact of that farm. Okay, next slide. So the last area I want to talk about is diversification of non-crop habitat. Oh, that's a long thing. What do I mean by that? So non-crop refers to areas within and surrounding a farm field. So for example, this is a picture of Greendale, I think. I'm pretty sure it is. And so this is a cropped area, right? It's a field. So is that, so is that. But you see around here, there's the buildings and the housing. That's a non-crop area, that edge. Along the road here, the soil may or may not be very good because it's right along the road. That potentially could be a non-crop habitat. And so on. So diversification means looking at those non-crop habitats and increasing the diversity of what's there. If there's no plants there, let's add plants there. If there are plants there, is it all just hedging cedars? Not that we don't want hedging cedars, but can we diversify and add different types of plants? And the emphasis here is on, can we add native plants to an area? So for us here in the Fraser Valley, that would be things like adding salal, Oregon grape. It would be adding things like elderberry, which has amazing blooms. Those are all examples of flowering shrubs that we could add to a hedging cedar planting to increase the diversity. We also want to focus on plants that provide some sort of ecosystem service. So if we have trees along a non-crop area, let's leave them. If we have a tree that is maybe needing to come down because, I don't know, whatever, it's shading a big area of the crop, instead of taking it all the way down, can we take it down in such a way that we leave enough of a standing dead that becomes habitat for nesting birds and bats and so forth. So some of the benefits that have been shown, oops, just go back 1 second. Some of the benefits that have been shown by diversifying or purposely adding non-crop areas, they include habitat for lots of species, again, not just insects, but birds, small mammals that are often food for raptors, as well as bats. There's the benefit of carbon sequestration, and that's been shown really well with some of the hedgerow work that's now 40 years old almost in Delta. And also the benefit of wind breaks. So next slide. So if you drive along the Sumas, you kind of go in and around some of the roads in the Sumas, every now and then you'll see fields with these rows of trees planted in them. And those trees were purposely planted for windbreaks by the Abbotsbury Soil Conservation Association. So that was a very forward-looking group, started in the late 80s, that was planting, and I believe they're still going. So it's very cool, that work, because these windbreaks are old, right? So they're very cool. And again, the goal of the windbreak is to prevent that loss of soil matter, especially in the fall or the winter, whenever the field might not have something planted on it. Next slide, please. Here's another practice. This is of a blueberry field in Manasquite, and what you can see is they've gone ahead and instead of leaving this bare, the area between the rows, they've gone ahead and let grass and some other people will call it weeds, but this grower sees the benefit of these buttercups, dandelion, and clover blooming and supporting pollinators. And then when he wants his blueberries to be pollinated, he just goes through and mows. And then it sort of shifts the pollinators up to the blueberries. And then when the pollination of the blueberries is done, he lets the clover come back. And then it supports it. So this is growers are doing this. Do all growers do it? No. Could more growers do it? Yes. And lastly, so this is an example of something that we would encourage growers to including, for example, a poultry facility or a dairy bar. There's lots of work, for example, looking at having a tree line sort of to capture, how do I say this? To capture any of the exhaust coming off of the fans of poultry barns, right? To have those sort of situated in such a way that you can kind of capture some of that air and the stank, right? So you're sort of capturing that with the trees. But you can then diversify those areas as well. And again, here we've got heather, that is a great pollinator plant. It blooms early. There's a summer heather that blooms late. Again, very good pollinator plant. So the area around your building, instead of landscaping it with grass, for example, you could landscape it with shrubs, etc. that would provide habitat. And this is one that we have put in, it's on the freezer valley, it's in Delta at the Cranberry Research Farm. And it doesn't have irrigation. So this is one that we did on purpose so growers can see that it can be low maintenance. It's not adding work. So non-crop diversification might look like taking that awesome tree line that was planted in the 90s and coupling it with some of the work that we've got with, diversified plantings as part of, bee-friendly landscaping and putting that together. So then, next slide please, we can end up with something that looks like the hedgerows that you see in Delta, BC. Hedgerows for people who, are connected to Europe and Britain. Those are places where the word hedgerow, they have a long history. And again, that's a lovely diversified hedgerow with high trees, shrubs that are blooming, and then what you can't see very well, but there's a layer, a herb layer at the bottom that also is diverse and providing habitat, etc., and cover for small mammals, etc. So this could be our other practice then to add back to the field. And again, a grower might worry, well, I'm giving up space. You could say, well, you have an edge that's kind of terrible anyway, that you're not getting good yield out of anyway. Maybe this is a place where you can give up to gain something else. So if we take Rasmussen out, the message of that paper then is the more of these practices you implement, the more we increase our sustainability, the more we increase those benefits both to the environment and again the yield benefits. So here we're putting all three of our practices into the field. Next slide, please. So I just want a few thoughts then about moving past the good and bad dichotomy that oftentimes people are entrenched with, and I'm guessing some people come in on some camps. And if you have, I'm not going to change your mind, and I'm not going to do that. People do. And farming is their business. And so if they want to see change in how food is produced, then I think we need to consider backing up our opinions with our dollars. So I have a lot of conversations with growers who are very frustrated when they see the opinions that people have about how they should produce food, and then the lack of a lineup at their farm stand. And then they have to toss out things. So one way, and this is my teacher hat, this is what we do, it's about moving away from sort of the good and the bad. It's just to be more discerning in our information. Next slide, please. So how many of us have heard of greenwashing? Okay, good. Hopefully all the hands go up. You have to be aware of those sort of misleading claims and those sort of generic claims. So the word sustainable, I think we can all agree kind of means a lot of things to a lot of people, which is too bad, because it does actually have a very distinct definition, but it's not often used that way. And it can be exhausting. But we are lucky to live in Chilliwack, and you are lucky to have neighbors who are farmers. I met someone downstairs who's not a farmer, and they said, just tell them if you want to be farmers, just join the curling club. As an educator, I'm always going to advocate for conversation and respectful dialogue. And so we need to remember that farmers are people too. We need to remember that there are bad actors in all professions. So the farmers who end up in the news because of their practice, that's one farm that's in the news because of their practice. It's not all the farms in that sector. And this would be the case for any profession. There are professors who are bad actors. It doesn't mean I'm a bad actor as a professor. And on we can go. Farms are businesses, and in the Fraser Valley, they contribute hugely to our GDP. And almost all farms in the Fraser Valley, regardless of size, are family farms. At the core of it, no matter how big or small, is a family. And lastly, I like to remind my students that conversations are two-way streets. So if you're going to ask questions, be prepared to answer some questions. And one of the main questions you might get asked is, where do you shop? And what choices do you make? And this is important, and this is my ending piece on my last slide, because this is Wendell Berry. I don't know if you know him. If you don't, I would recommend Googling him. He's amazing. He's a poet and a farmer. And he has this great quote, and often people just do the first part of the quote. The whole quote is worth knowing. Eating is an agricultural act, and shopping for your food is an agricultural act. So, that carrot field in the sumac that has a hedgerow that's diversified, that's paying for crop scouting because it costs money to have that done, or if they do it themselves, it still costs money, and is planting cover crops, their carrots are going to be more expensive, regardless of if they're organic or conventional. And so the question becomes, when you go to shop for it, regardless of where you shop, will you pay attention to that, and will you vote for your doctor? So thank you very much.
We'll take questions if you have any.
I just don't know if I can answer. That's okay. Yeah.
I was to know in the store, the farmer has had those cover crops and the crop cutting. You know, if they say organic, that's something, you know, we're not, certainly we have no way of knowing other.
Yeah. So that's where, so the question is, well, how do you know if the farmer has all these practices? And again, one of the things that is often emphasized is that you can, and again, lucky to live in Chilliwack, where you can diversify how you shop for your food. So at this time of year, yeah, the only place to get carrots is the grocery store, I think. But at other times of the year, you can go to the farm stands, and you can go to farmers market, and then you can talk to those producers, and you can find out more. So for example, not to plug anyone, but the work I do the most is with Wisby Farms in the sumac, and so they are very willing to engage in conversation. And then when you talk to them, you learn that most of their produce, if it's not sold as a farm stand, is sold through BC Fresh. And then so again, it's your homework, but then you can go on BC Fresh and find out what practices they have their growers do. Yeah. But I'm not just saying only BC Fresh. Yeah.
Do you recommend biochar as a product you use?
I don't know anything about biochar, but in the Rasmussen study, that was one of the soil conservation practices that came up, was biochar. So, but I believe it would be very much how the biochar is used. Yeah.
In all the hedgerows I saw, the trees and shrubs appeared to be deciduous. Wouldn't it be better practice to include some coniferous, because in this part of the valley, the wind roars when you're in the winter?
So the Asta hedgerows were mostly deciduous. I'm not sure what the rationale is for that. The plantings outside of poultry barns barns, like to sort of trap the exhaust from the fans. Those are mostly conifers, hedging cedars that are recommended. In an ideal world, you'd have a mix. The value, though, so I can't speak to the windbreak stuff, because I get what you're thinking, but the value of deciduous trees is when those leaves fall, all those decaying leaves become an excellent food source for a whole bunch of beneficial insects that can overwinter in that edge. Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
I noticed the letters GDP in there, and I was wondering, don't we really have to stop doing growth?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is true. But think about how to answer this. We can, but then we need to know what that alternative is, and then growers need to know how they fit into that. Right? So for example, there's a great farm, I'm plugging one more farm. It's Cedar Isle Grain Farm on Seabird Island, and we do our field trips out there. And they said that their model, their economic model, is a food sovereignty model. And I love that. And they said that it allows them to be responsive to their community. And they have very close connection with their community, to the point where because they run as a CSA, Community Support Agriculture, where when they are bringing in their grain, and there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, their CSA customers will come and help them do that. If you're willing to do that, then growers will be able to do that. But are they a model for others? Question mark. Or are they unique? Question mark. I don't know the answer to that, but if we're going to replace GDP as our metric, growers need to know what that replacement is and how they fit into it. I don't know. Your questions are always hard. We'll try.
So this is somebody good question, see now, people are getting vertical farming
Yes.
and hydroponics.
Yes.
They are becoming more and more popular.
Yes.
So what impact it will have on the soil? So you dealing with the soil,
Yes.
retaining the soil,
Yes.
the moisture and the fertility and the all this.
Yes. So, I think your question is, how does vertical farming fit in with sustainable or regenerative agriculture? Yeah. It is a good question. I think that, and so this is just my opinion. Just my opinion. I think that food security is a big tent. We have this challenge of growing enough food and getting enough food to people and reducing our food waste. And so, is vertical agriculture a part of the solution? Yes, I think it could be. But is it the only way forward? No, I don't think so. And my line for the students is always, the sun is still free. So while it's still free, let's keep growing outside in the soil with the sun. Because if we don't use our agricultural land for growing food, it will become an RV park, or it will become something else that really then comes out of production. Does that answer your question? Sort of?
Yeah, because I think that he is in the soil. But I mean, like you said, you can't just depend on the farming for that point. You have to have food.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that the gentleman said about biochar. Biochar is very, very important. It acts like a web and retains the nutrients. So that way, nutrients won't,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it was in that study. It's definitely, I don't know it personally, but it is an important tool. Yeah. Yep.
How would tilling protect the biosphere of the soil? How does that come back in our lungs?
Yeah, so our growers here, minimal or zero-till is not really easily done or very feasible here. But when growers do till here, they're not tilling like they were in the 50s, right? Right. So it's still quite shallow. And so if you have lots of organic matter, it will come back, right? So and the benefits of making what we call a good seed bed are, there's other benefits that the crop will experience further down that they might not see with zero or minimal till. And one thing people don't know about zero or minimal till is that weed control is very difficult. And so you can end up using more herbicide in that situation. And I'm not saying herbicide is good or bad, I'm neutral on that, it's a tool in the toolbox. But if your idea is that you don't want any chemicals, then zero or minimal till kind of doesn't actually equal that, right? So it's always, how do I say this? It's a little bit like your own healthcare. You might have a sore knee and you could take some pill to fix that sore knee, but maybe you have a sore knee because of other things that are happening. And so maybe dealing with the other things is more important, right? So there's the acute issue, but then there's the long-term issue, and then that whole system. And it's a lot. And the data to really help us make good decisions and to advise growers is very slow and hard to develop, but the data is there. So.
I was just thinking, we have all these measures that we have thought about which are applicable to different areas. And so in terms of, as you mentioned, for Fraser Valley, you can't go minimal till or till. You have to And so do you think these measures are going to change as we see a shift in climate? And are we ready for that?
I don't know. I think that's one that only time and data will tell. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Prasad. On behalf of the Climate Action Committee and the Rotary Club of Chilliwack, thank you for giving us your valuable time this afternoon and for your passion to help the next generation of our farmers to be ready for the future, and really for providing us also with information about how we can, in a small way, get involved in sustainable agriculture. We would like you to please accept this token for our appreciation.